Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All coming to you on Friday afternoon. I actually don't have time to do this video, but I'm going to squeeze it in. There is some really interesting stuff going on in the land of strawberry fields or Q-Star or whatever you want to call it. So I wanted to touch on that, and specifically I wanted to go over a post that Chubby did that I think is really, really fascinating, really good job. And I followed them. I actually hadn't even known about them before, even though they were following me, so thank you for following me. And I definitely now have followed them and have asserted that you should go and do that as well. So anyway, we will get to that more in just a minute. But let's start with Sam Altman being the super troll on X, as he always is. I love Summer in the Garden. Turns out this is actually not AI generated. This is actually his garden, but it has strawberries in it. And of course, the rumor is that Q-Star became strawberry over time. And of course, Sam is now trolling us all with the fact that strawberry exists. And he actually replied to another post about level 2. How do you feel? And he replied, I'm feeling great, to be honest, which is really interesting as well, because of course, level 2 is something that OpenAI has set out. They said they were on the cusp of level 2, which is an AI agent that can actually reason, not just a chatbot, but one that can think and everything. And that, of course, is what strawberry is supposed to be all about as well. Okay, with that, let's turn to Chubby's post from a few days ago about Q-Star, or what OpenAI apparently is calling it now, which is Project Strawberry. I did a video last fall about Q-Star when we first heard about it. If you haven't seen that video, definitely check it out, because I go into much more detail about what Q-Star is. And even though that video is about 7 or 8 months old right now, I think it's still pretty accurate in terms of what most people think Q-Star is. And of course, just in the last 24 hours, we've seen a couple of new large language models pop up, including one called Sus, or I guess Suspicious or something. It's what the young kids call stuff. I don't know. But anyway, that has popped up and people are beginning to test it out, although it's not very easy to do at this point because you have to do it in a battle format, so you don't know which of the LLMs you're actually getting until you actually ask the question and get the answers. But real quick, before we go through Chubby's post, let's go ahead and talk about A-Star and Q-Learning, which are the two pieces of the puzzle for Q-Star. So A-Star is a very venerable old algorithm, I think from the 60s, maybe the early 70s. Anyway, it has been around a long time, and basically it's an informed search algorithm that's pretty deterministic. Assuming it has perfect knowledge of the world, which would usually be some sort of grid or something simplified, not full reality, but assuming it has perfect knowledge of that world, and you give it a good heuristic for the step cost, in other words, the transition cost from one state to another, and a good estimate of the cost to get to the goal. In other words, if you're trying to go through a maze, like, how many steps have you gone? So that's a cost. And then how many steps does it expect to take to the finish line to get to the end at a minimum? And so as long as you pick those values correctly, A-Star will give you as long as you pick those two values correctly, A-Star will actually give you the optimal answer. And that is an actually huge feature of A-Star. And so you can see that in this very simple formula down here. A-Star is actually relatively simple. You've got G sub n, which is the cost of the path from the start to that point, and you've got H sub n, which is a heuristic function, in other words, a human determined function that estimates the cost of the cheapest path from n to the goal. As long as you pick those correctly, it will give you a really good answer. Now, it might take a while if it's a very complex environment, but it will give you the optimal answer. So that's a classic sort of deterministic AI algorithm, but then we can combine that with Q-learning, and Q-learning is a model-free reinforcement learning algorithm to learn the value of an action in a particular state. It does not require a model of the environment, hence model-free, and it can handle problems with stochastic transitions and rewards without requiring adaptations. So why do you need Q-learning to go with A-Star? For the real world, you don't really have a heuristic function. In other words, if you're solving a maze, you can pretty much determine the minimum cost to get to the goal state because you can see the maze. But in reality, you don't really understand reality that well, and so you don't have an a priori heuristic function that you can throw at it. And so what Q-learning can do is it can actually determine that heuristic. It can figure out what the proper cost is going to be to get from where you are to the goal state. And if you combine Q-learning with A-Star, you get what could be an amazingly good algorithm that would be able to reason and go back and think about things as it needed to. The problem right now with large language models is they're off the cuff. They're sort of speaking, you're like, hey, tell me a poem or something, and it composes the poem. What it doesn't do is go back and scratch out lines that it doesn't like and fix those lines. It doesn't edit the poem unless you ask it to. Of course, you can prompt engineer it and say, okay, that was good, but give me a better version of it or something, or ask it to do that itself. And yeah, it can do some of that stuff on itself, but an effective combination of Q-learning and A-Star would be able to do this stuff on its own, and it would be able able to think about it, with the cost of a great deal of calculation, much, much more than a large language model. It's the same thing as if somebody asks you to like just talk to them, right? So you're just talking off the cuff, kind of like I am right now, versus can you give me a 20-minute presentation on some esoteric topic that you're going to have to research? That's going to take a lot of time and mental computation cost on your part as a human being to create that presentation. And that's something that LLMs have not had up to this point. And that is the advantage of this. So what you're doing is trading computation cost for the quality of the answer. That's, the TLDR of all of this stuff. However this works, you're trading off the ability to think quickly and just come up with something rapidly with low computation cost for much more computation cost for what is hopefully a substantially better answer. All right, so with all of that as prelude, let's go ahead to Chubby's post. I said outstanding read, definitely follow them on X. Here we go. Forward, QStar has not been published or made publicly available. There are no papers on it, and OpenAI is holding back on information about it, and Sam was very definite about that in his Lex Friedman interview. Since the first hints, the community has been trying to figure out what QStar might be, and I think I'm actually pretty well onto it. I think it's pretty easy. It's in the name. Anyway, in this article, I compile all of the information I could find to paint a possible picture of QStar, including all possible hypotheses and assumptions. I think they mean my theses, are backed up with various papers, articles, and conclusions. Nevertheless, everything written here should be read with a certain grain of salt, of course. It is also important to me to make this text as comprehensible and beginner-friendly as possible. Thank you. The trick is to put complex issues into simple words. Moving on here, and I'm going to skip a lot of the references, but again, I will leave a link to this in the description. So if you want to see the references and they're clickable in here, so definitely look at the original. And like I said, definitely follow Chubby. They deserve more followers. About a half a year ago, the information and Reuters learned from OpenAI employees that a scientific breakthrough had been achieved at the research facility. For the first time, a model has succeeded in learning by itself with the help of a new algorithm and acquiring logical mathematical skills without external influence. So without being specifically trained to do that. This is something that transformer architectures cannot normally do due to their characteristics, as their results are outputs of probabilities. So really quick, GPTs using transformers just predict the most likely next word in a sentence, right? Which means they're really good at off-the-cuff chatting. They're chatbots, but they're not good as reasoning agents or solving math problems that require a lot of thinking and a lot of going back, back and forth, kind of iteration in order to get to the solution. Continuing on, logical thinking and self-learning are a necessity that many thinkers believe is a prerequisite for artificial general intelligence, although there's still no standard definition. An AI therefore requires absolute correctness in its output in order to be transferred to all human processes, something that OpenAI itself repeatedly emphasizes in blog posts. In addition, AGI requires general knowledge at expert level in all areas of knowledge. One must not forget the G in AGI, generalization. In this respect, this breakthrough in OpenAI reported by Reuters and The Information seemed to be the key on the road to AGI, which may have frightened many. And then Chubby references AI Explained and Matthew Berman, both excellent YouTube resources, and I will also throw mine in as well. Like I said, I will leave a link to mine in the description. And if we go back and remember, this is right around the time that Sam Altman was fired, so there was big stuff going on at OpenAI. Anyway, ahead of OpenAI CEO Sam Altman's 4 days in exile, several staff researchers wrote a letter to the board of directors warning of a powerful artificial intelligence discovery that they said could threaten humanity. Two people familiar with the matter told Reuters. Some at OpenAI believe QStar could be a breakthrough in the startup search for what's known as AGI. One of the people told Reuters, OpenAI defines AGI as autonomous systems that surpass humans in most economically valuable tasks. Given vast computing resources, the new model was able to solve certain mathematical problems, the person said on condition of anonymity because the individual was not authorized to speak on behalf of the company, though only performing math on the level of grade school students. Acing such tests made researchers very optimistic about QStar's future success, the source said. So remember, this is November of last year. This is quite a while ago, so grade school math might have gone to, graduate school math at this point. And as I spoke about before, currently generative AI is good at writing and language translation by statistically predicting the next word, and answers to the same question can vary widely. But conquering the ability to do math where there is only one right answer implies AI would have greater reasoning capabilities resembling human intelligence. This could be applied to novel scientific research, for instance, AI researchers believe. And then a quote from Sam Altman from right around this time: 4 times now in the history of OpenAI, the most recent time was just in the last couple of weeks, I've gotten to be in the room when we sort of push the veil of ignorance back and the frontier of discovery forward, and getting to do that is the professional honor of a lifetime. Jumping down a little bit, Jacob Pachoki and Simon Sidor, 2 top researchers at OpenAI, used Sutskever's work to build a model called QStar that was able to solve math problems that it hadn't seen before, an important technical milestone. A demo of the model circulated within OpenAI in recent weeks, and the pace of development alarmed some researchers focused on AI safety. And then this is really interesting. I'm going to do a video on this topic in the next couple of days. It's based on this particular post here that is a response to Ashok Elaswamy and Andre Karpathy. So stay tuned for that, and definitely like and subscribe if you want to check those out. Anyway, it's all about reinforcement learning, and you can see here, Sutskever's breakthrough allowed OpenAI to overcome limitations on obtaining enough high-quality data to train new models, according to the person with knowledge, a major obstacle for developing next-generation models. The research involved using computer-generated rather than real-world data like text or images pulled from the internet to train new models. Chubby then throws in a note about the potential exponential expansion of learning once one of these entities can learn on its own. A big concern is about cryptography, which is basically just really complicated math. As they state, it could be at risk in the foreseeable future due to exponential development on all data encryption. What would stop an AI that teaches itself math from finding a solution to encryption if you just give the model enough time and compute? And that is a valid concern. So in the interest of time, I'm going to skip a little bit ahead, but again, like I said, definitely read the original article because it is well worth it. According to Kahneman, a Nobel Prize winner, there are 2 thought processes or 2 systems in which people think: System 1 thinking and System 2 thinking. System 1 thinking is intuitive thinking, in other words, just talking to somebody, thinking that takes place automatically and intuitively. At the moment, the large language models can only think in System 1 way by outputting a probability result based on their training data. This corresponds to intuitive thinking. System 2 thinking, however, is complex thinking. It is the kind of thinking that involves thinking steps and process divisions. If we want to solve difficult math problems, for example, we cannot arrive at the result intuitively, but have to approach the solution step by step. Chubby then states that QStar is the breakthrough par excellence in that it eradicates the biggest problems of LLMs. Instead of laboriously training LLMs using reinforcement learning through human feedback, or RLHF, a model with QStar is able to learn on its own. And remember that the Q learning part of QStar is model-free reinforcement learning. In other words, it's able to learn on its own through its own feedback. And that is the crucial sort of liberator. It no longer depends on human beings to teach it. Same sort of thing moving from Go, where DeepMind's early systems learned Go from studying human games to allowing it to play on its own, at which point it became far superior to any human being. So that's the kind of, cool thing that could happen, but also terrifying thing that could happen with an algorithm like QStar. Chubby, of course, comes to the same conclusion I did. This presumably led to 2 processes: Q-learning and A-star search, which we have talked about. Q-learning teaches the model to learn by itself, something that Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman calls System 2 thinking. Then Chubby continues, the combination of Q-learning and A-star search teaches the model to think and find solutions independently and to correct itself. This means that the hallucination will stop and correct solutions will be output as a result, because the solution is not simply taken from the training data and is based on probability. This means that the biggest problem of LLMs, their inaccuracy, can be avoided and start to develop an accuracy to make them accessible for completely different academic sciences. However, QStar is likely to be very computationally intensive, as I talked about, and this is where GPT Mini comes into play. My hypothesis is that OpenAI will use GPT Mini to reduce energy requirements and save on compute. And I would throw in as well that they might make use of chips like Grok's chips as well, GROQ, because Grok is incredibly fast at generating tokens from large language models. Now, thus far, OpenAI and Grok have not had a good relationship, but I could either see OpenAI getting a closer relationship with Grok or developing their own chips that are similar and competitive to Grok's in order to generate tokens much more rapidly. And then Chubby goes through a couple of prompting techniques like chain of thought and tree of thought that actually are very good and give traditional LLMs the ability to do some reasoning, although not perfect. Anyway, then they start talking about self-play. Self-play is the idea that an agent can improve its gameplay by playing against slightly different versions of itself because it'll progressively encounter more challenging situations. In other words, you have two agents that are battling it out and they're both learning and getting better at the same time. This is a system that's been used a long time in generative adversarial networks and all sorts of other things, including Google DeepMind's AlphaZero. And then we get to Chubby's presentation of another paper that's sort of related to all this stuff, and that article is titled Quiet Star: Language Models Can Teach Themselves to Think Before Speaking, which examines how language models can improve their predictions by learning and applying rational thinking patterns. To this end, the Quiet Star, or potentially Q Star, approach is presented, which enables models to generate rational thoughts for each token prediction, improving model performance on difficult tasks. So, in summary, Chubby says, Q-star algorithm combines Q-learning and A-star for improved goal-oriented thinking, number one, and I agree with that. Number two, process monitoring provides step-by-step feedback to improve model performance. So again, this is all internal to the model. Then we get three, the star approach, generates rational thought with each token prediction. Four, overcoming hallucinations. Process monitoring and star makes decision-making more accurate and reliable. And finally, five, application. These approaches promote the development of more robust and reliable AI systems. So in the end, what Project Strawberry or Q-Star might be doing is allowing a computer to learn on its own. And if that sounds both incredibly exciting and incredibly terrifying at the same time, that's probably the reason that OpenAI has been in a great deal of turmoil since last November and probably will continue to be for the foreseeable future. All right, so that's the latest on Project Strawberry or Q-Star. Let me know in the comments what you think about all of this. And remember, I'm going to be doing a video on reinforcement learning without human feedback in the next couple of days, so definitely stay tuned for that. If you wouldn't mind liking this video and subscribing, that would be wonderful, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.